We did a similar process here in Logan Square in 2009, in July of 2009. We had the same kind of process that you're going to be hearing from today. And after the process is over, we came up with this very professional looking manual. Actually, it's this one. And this one kind of helped to shape and guide what the vision was for our community for these parcels. The only thing is that we were planning for other people's property. We're really good at planning on what we want to do on other people's property. In this particular case, it's very exciting because we're planning what to do with property that belongs to the city of Chicago. And you will have input today and decide if anything happens there or something happens there, something dynamic happens there. There's lots of different needs that have been brought to our attention as a community. So some people are very interested in providing affordable housing, which has risen to the top as far as being one of the top community concerns. There's other folks that are looking at, commercial uses or more art spaces or, fresh food stores and things of that nature. But this is an exciting and different kind of meeting because usually when it comes to having zoning changes, developers are coming to us, asking us to alter the law and change things so that they can build something that they want. No one's coming to us right now. This is an opportunity for us to kind of design and pass off an idea to someone else and say, this is what we want to see happen in our community. And so I thought that these parcels are big enough and important enough and located in an area that is a very treasured part of our neighborhood that we all needed to have a say. And so that's the reason that I've asked you to come here today. That's the reason that I've asked the Metropolitan Planning Council with their great expertise and professionalism to facilitate this process. So at this time, I'm going to ask Marisa from the Metropolitan Planning Council to take you to the next stage of the program. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Marisa Novara. I'm with the Metropolitan Planning Council. I will tell you more about us and about this process, but I'd also like to add a few words of thanks. And first and foremost to that is to Alderman Colon and his staff. The Alderman actually brought this opportunity to us and said that he really wanted to be on the forefront of proactive planning for this space, and I really think that's commendable. We also have a large number of volunteers that help to make this possible. So tonight we have the Getzler Architecture Firm, we have Canopy Architects, we have students from IIT School of Architecture. We also have help from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, doing translation. We have numerous staff from the Metropolitan Planning Council as well. If you're helping us out tonight in any way, can you please raise your hand? Thanks to all of you. I'd also like to recognize that we have staff, because this land that we're talking about around the Logan Square Blue Line stop is city-owned. We do have representatives here tonight from the Department of Transportation, or CDOT, the Chicago Transportation Authority, or CTA, as well as the Department of Planning and Development. And they've committed to being here through this process and answering questions. And they've also been very helpful getting to this point and making sure we had the information we needed and committing to use what comes out of this process in their work. So I thank them as well. So just a bit about the Metropolitan Planning Council. We've been around for 80 years. We're a planning and policy change organization. We partner with governments, we partner with business and communities to solve problems. One of the problems that we've been very focused on is the lack of equitable transit-oriented development. What do we mean by that? We mean that we feel that new development, to the greatest extent possible, should be focused around transit as a really strategic asset in a community, and that to the greatest extent possible, that should be accessible to a range of incomes. What we've seen is that instead, in many cases, that is not the case around our region. And if you look back in time, if you took a snapshot of 1950, for instance, you'd find that the majority of people would live near transit, and that transit would take them to their job, to their place of work. If you fast forward to today, you'll see that in fact it's the opposite. The majority of people do not live near transit or jobs or to their place of work. In fact, if you look at the number of people who live within a half mile of transit, that number has decreased by about 500,000 over the past 50 years in this region. The result is that we're all driving a lot more, and that means we have more congestion, we have more pollution, we have higher transportation costs, and we're increasingly isolated and segregated from one another. So MPC really encourages jobs and housing that's affordable to a range of incomes near transit as much as possible. One of the ways that we are doing that is through the effort that we're kicking off tonight called the Corridor Development Initiative. So this is a series of interactive public workshops. This is a 3-part series where we try to help folks proactively plan for their community. We have been deliberately building off of transit opportunities as a way to proactively plan to develop as smartly as possible around the asset of transit. So we just finished up a process in the Uptown neighborhood this spring. Many of you, I think, took copies of the report that we did for that process. We worked closely with Alderman Kappelman on a closed Chicago public school and some CTA land right around the Wilson Red Line. And it's encouraging to know that at this point Alderman Kappelman is using those results to work with CPS on the reuse of that school. CTA is using those results as it's working with Truman College and other partners in the area to rethink how to use that space. So we think that these results can be really transformative, and we're looking forward to working with all of you in the same way. So why Logan Square? One reason is that Alderman Colon asked us. As we looked at the opportunity, though, we saw that Logan Square is one of Chicago's most dense communities. And with density, you have an special attention that needs to be paid to how well we're using space around transit. It's also very transit rich. We know that the Logan Square Blue Line stop has 7,000 round trips daily. Once you get outside of the loop, that's second only to O'Hare in ridership. So that's a very significant asset in this community. It's also an incredibly diverse community, I don't have to tell you that. Not just race and ethnicity, but also in language and income and culture. And we know that there are some demographic shifts underway, and for many of you, those demographic shifts may be top of mind as you came here tonight. Something that we really value about this process is that we have found it a really important way to plan for change while preserving the identity of a community that matters to people who live there. And finally, this is an area where there are significant public investments already underway. So we see ourselves as building off of those efforts, not starting from scratch. There's already lots and lots of efforts underway. We have reports on many of those in the back. So the Bicentennial Plan, the Milwaukee Avenue, streetscaping project, Your New Blue, which is the effort to rehab the Blue Line. Those are all things that are underway and we're very much building off of. So the role of the alderman and MPC in this process. The alderman is interested in, as he mentioned, kind of a proactive plan for this space to then inform discussions with the city around what might become of it. He has committed to using the outcome of your work here in forming those plans, as has the city departments committed to that. So Alderman Colon will use the conclusions to help guide that process. Metropolitan Planning Council is an independent facilitator of the process. So by independent, we are independently funded to do this work. We've not been paid by the alderman nor by anyone who is involved in some way in future development here. So we are independent, but we do have a point of view, and I just want to be clear in stating our point of view, as I've already talked about, is certainly that transit is an incredibly important and strategic asset around which to build, and that when we have an opportunity to do so, we should really do so as thoughtfully as possible. So what that actually looks like in Logan Square is not for us to say, that's for all of you to say, but that is certainly the passion that we bring to this conversation. So I want to walk through for you what this process looks like. I'll explain each of these a bit. I'll talk a little bit more about the site specifically. We'll open up the floor for question and answers. We'll do a little keypad polling where we'll actually be able to hear from from all of you, kind of take a pulse of the room, and then we'll have some small group discussions where you'll be able to work through some questions at your table with a facilitator. So the process here is a three-part process. So we really hope that all of you can come to all 3 meetings. We promise we will order more food and have more chairs at the next one. So the first meeting tonight, we are setting the stage. So we'll be going through, we'll be hearing from you about how you feel about the existing conditions kind of overall in Logan Square, and then specifically your thoughts on this site and what might be needed there. 1 week from tonight, we will reconvene, and that's when we will really get down to work. You'll have maps on the table, you'll have blocks that represent different. So you'll have a block that might represent a certain amount of housing or a certain amount of parking or a certain amount of green space, and you will build out what you would like to see on that space. We will have developers on hand who will run the numbers and help think through how you might actually finance that space. We'll also have architects on hand who will sketch out what you're describing to them, and you can work with them to say, no, that's not what I meant, I wanted it to look more like this or like that, and they'll work with you to come up with that. The third meeting on Tuesday, September 30th is kind of 2 parts. One, we'll have a developer forum where we have developers who give you some real-time feedback on the proposals that you put forth in the second meeting. The other thing that we'll do is we will do some work between meetings 2 and 3 to really crunch some numbers on your scenarios. So if we find that there's a big gap in what it would take to actually finance what you've come up with, we'll propose some scenarios that might help shrink that gap and make it more likely to be buildable, and then we'll ask you to vote on whether you find those acceptable changes or not. And at the end of that, we'll come down to several visions that you have. We're not searching for one unanimous vision for this place, as that's not realistic or needed. But like in Uptown, we came up with several where we felt there was consensus around this as an important vision for the community, and that's what we would look for here. So before I move off of this, I really just want to stress one thing, which is that I think we've probably all been to a community meeting where you walked in the door and someone had a bright, shiny plan and rolled it out to you and said, now you get to contribute and you can choose whether you want red brick or brown brick. And that was sort of the extent of the feedback. And I just want to stress, I've certainly been to that community meeting. I have no interest in being in any more meetings like that. I want to stress how much this is not that. This is actually a process of inquiry where we are coming up with the outcome together. And many of you may have come in the door already with a pretty strong idea of what you'd like to see, and that's wonderful. The only thing I'd ask is that you remain open to the idea of continuing to shape that idea together as we go through this process. So tonight, we'll discuss the future of Logan Square as a whole, and we'll also talk specifically about the Blue Line Station Plaza, the bus turnaround area, and the adjacent parking. So a little bit of context on the space that we're talking about. So the site includes both the plaza around the Logan Square Blue Line station as well as the adjacent parking lot. The parking lot we know is about 30% utilized most of the time, so that's one thing just to keep in mind. In addition, the station itself, we know, will be impacted by the station improvements that are underway on the whole Blue Line from the Loop to O'Hare. Specific to Logan Square, you can expect to see improvements in escalators, elevators, as well as station entrances. One other thing just to note as far as context is that CDOT is studying improvements to traffic circulation in the area, and those are improvements looking to cause improvements around things like traffic congestion, traffic crashes, and improve things like cycling and walking. And so they're in the process of examining that right now. It will be several years before they're in a position to act on those findings. And when they are ready to, the results of this will certainly be something that they will consider. I'd like to pause now and see if there are questions that we can answer for you. Certainly, staff here at MPC are happy to answer any questions you may have on process. There's also folks here from the city if you have specific questions about the site And of course, Alderman Colon is here as well.
I see you have a camera and you're filming. Will we be able to watch this on YouTube or something?
This is Logan Square TV. And will they be able to see you on YouTube?
Yeah.
Yes, is the answer. Logan Square TV.
It's on Logan Square TV, not on YouTube. It's at LoganSquare.TV.
LoganSquare.TV. We are being filmed. Not by me.
I'm glad to hear about the TV because that actually fits in with my question, which is I can only come to this session, but I have other neighbors in the building where I'll tag TV. And so they ran out of agendas and slides and printouts and things like that. So how can we get those and distribute this information to other people who are going to come to the other meetings so that they're not behind?
Sure. You can certainly look to our website. So the Metropolitan Planning Council has a detailed page on Logan Square that has all of the information that we had here tonight on the website. We'll have, you know, one of the hard parts about a process like this is we don't know how many people will come. So we do apologize if we ran out of anything that you needed tonight. But we will, our website is a great resource. We will have everything. But we also can make things available to everyone who supplied us with an email address electronically as well. It's metroplanning.org / Logan Square.
I know the focus of this is the CTA and city-owned parking lot space, but integrated planning, and you referenced as part of the background, CDOT attention to traffic improvements. Well, the redesign of the Boulevard Square, such as possibly square the circle with this giant, on the west side of the Boulevard Square, there are 5 traffic lanes, the chaos of people trying to peel off to turn to go westbound on Wrightwood. That CDOT has been working on that for a long time. There have been previous meetings sponsored by the city as part of the integrated planning for Milwaukee Avenue redesign. And there's a lot of Fed funding for that. I assume 80% of the cost of that comes from Fed sources. In downtown, way outbound, and obviously Logan Square includes Milwaukee Avenue. There were multiple meetings about that, nothing has really ever come of it. And I'd also like to point out, part of integrated planning, 4.5 acres of site, the 2.5 or 2.7 acres of the mega mall site, plus 2 acres of CTA-owned land next to the Boulevard Square, just southwest of the square, which is an amazing site for something city signature as an activities destination. And nothing much has come of that. Here's a Tribune editorial from 2008 supporting the creation of a park center at that site, including the new Children's Museum. If not Grant Park, then where else? And I didn't see NPC or the aldermen being very active in supporting that amazing, local, transit-oriented design.
Was that a question? I think do you want to answer the CDOT related question at all about squaring the square or squaring the circle? I don't want to put you on the spot, even though I did. But.
Thank you, Alderman. I'm Bridget Stala from the Chicago Department of Transportation. I'm the project manager for the Milwaukee project we cited. We are in progress of selecting a consultant to further study the designs we have finalized back in 2004 for the Milwaukee-Logan intersection, as well as Milwaukee from Belmont to Logan. We're in process of selecting a consultant. We anticipate to do so this fall and start work on revisiting that location with TIP funds that we have secured to expedite that work. We anticipate to have some general information by next spring, summer to move forward on some of the concepts we think might be feasible, particularly as they pertain to the Logan Square area, the Logan Boulevard Square.
Thank you.
I was just wondering about what the timeline is for redevelopment of the site, because you said something right at the end about the CDOT study being done in several years and they might look at this. So are we talking about 5 years for the future before this would be redeveloped, or what is the timeline?
Julie, I think the plan was to get the feedback from these series of meetings and have that simultaneously as CDOT is studying what's happening with the square. We don't really want to move forward on something that can have an adverse effect on what the engineering study is going to do. That's going to take at least a year. So we won't have an idea about the results of this for at least after a year. I will say there's a lot of interest for this site. There's developers in the room that want to hear, they don't want to wait for us to come out with this study. They want to hear right now what people want and be able to put in a very competitive proposal to do something that's grand in scale. And I think we're going to continue to see a lot of competition between investors, developers, and architects on what this site will bring. So I don't have an immediate answer. I think 5 years sounds good, but I don't know for sure. I do know that we own the property, and that's a good thing. That but this is a kind of a process. When we did we developed this building, we had a community process. We made that outcome into the RFP, which is what selected this building to get done. Same thing across the street. That was supposed to be done in June, and I'm still waiting for them to plant the plants across the street. So nothing happens really in the time that you think and can project. But my goal is to, as soon as we hear back from the engineering study that CDOT has commissioned, then we'll have a better idea of what's possible on the site. And I don't know, I don't have any preconceived notions on what you guys are going to come up with. So, we're looking at a blank canvas here, and you guys all have a paintbrush in your hands tonight. So what you're doing through this process is to kind of drive what this is going to look like at the end.
Hi, my question is, as you're talking about this being a developmental process where we're all making the decisions, are you saying that basically these three meetings that you planned and set up, we want to have an idea of, we're going to have us vote today with one idea to go with it, or the second meeting to go with it, or I just kind of want to know what the language is, what the details are like.
So basically the way this process ends is that you're going to be using your clickers, and that's going to help us to identify consensus amongst us. And it may end up that our consensus includes 3 different ideas for this site. Whatever is derived from this consensus that we get will be the language we use for whatever requests for proposals come up. So, the end result, even after you come up with your ideas, that's going to turn into kind of a request for proposals that somebody else is going to come up. And so I'll be working with MPC on, once we get to that point where we actually have some proposals for some real investors who want to do a project, then we'll come back and look at all the different ideas and see if we can find consensus on one.
Yeah, I would just to be clear, the actual voting that we do around projects is in the 3rd meeting, and to be clear, it's not really about saying I like this project more than that one. It's more about saying, well, given the options to make this project, this vision viable, would we be willing to make this change or that change? So for instance, in Uptown, we made some adjustments to say, well, you know, you had laid out 120 spaces for parking, but under the TOD ordinance, you actually could have as few as 30, and that would close your financing gap significantly. Do you feel like that's an acceptable trade-off? And people voted as to whether they felt like that worked for them in that space. So we went through a series of changes like that people voted on, yes or no. And then at the end, as you can see in the Uptown report, we had several different scenarios that, that came out of the process that CPS is now using as part of what's in the request for proposals to developers for that site. Okay, I know we said one last question, which was that one, but okay, we really have to go on to the keypad polling. All right, so our system just shut down, so we're gonna switch gears. We're gonna go right to our small group discussion, and then at the end we'll come back to this, hopefully when we've worked out all of our bugs. So if you could, look to your facilitator. So if you're a facilitator at your table, please identify yourself. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and get started with some discussions. At the end, we will report back out and hear from all of you about what you came up with at your table. So we'll give you the high sign when it's close to time to